the Tulsa Higher Education Consortium is made up of 7 Tulsa Region higher education institutions, including Langston University, TU, NSU, OSU Tulsa, RSU, TCC, and OU Tulsa. You'll notice that each of the institutions are represented in the consortium logo, their school colors. There are also 7 affiliate members who joined the consortium or became a part of what initially started as the Tulsa Transfer Project back in 2018, and then formalized into a task force in 2020. And you'll see those on the bottom of the screen. The consortium's mission is 4-part: to align with its partners to advance student learning and higher education, improve student success and degree completion, achieve equity in student outcomes, and meet workforce needs through collaboration. You may or may not have noticed, but the titles of each of the presentations this week actually link back to the mission of the consortium. As I kind of alluded to, the consortium's formation was actually rooted in transfer work through the Tulsa Transfer Project, which started in 2017. That project was intended to make Tulsa area students' post-secondary experiences as seamless as possible, specifically when transferring from TCC to a receiving institution. In regard to what the consortium is and does, the consortium seeks to align with the powerful efforts of these 7 institutions to improve the experience of students in the region while serving as a unifying and coordinating entity for colleges, universities, business, and community partners. So the reason why we're here today and celebrating National Transfer Week kind of goes back to that second point on our mission: supporting student success and degree completion. We'll be talking about creating that seamless experience throughout the presentation. So let's all kind of start at the same starting place by determining or identifying, what is a transfer student? And this definition actually comes from the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students. The acronym is NIST. A transfer student is someone who begins their post-secondary academic career at one institution, earns credits through the completion of coursework, and then transfers to a different institution to finish their education at any point in that process. Typically, transfer students, when they transfer, are sophomores or juniors credit-wise. But again, they can transfer at any point in their journey. There are a few different transfer-related terms. A vertical transfer is when somebody transfers from an institution where they receive their associates to an institution where they can pursue their bachelor's. A lateral is where somebody's at any point in their post-secondary trajectory and they transfer to a similar institution that offers similar degrees. Reverse transfer would be like starting at in a bachelor's program and then transferring to an associate's program. And then swirling, which was kind of a new concept for me a couple of years back, includes students who transfer to multiple institutions throughout the course of their post-secondary journey. We know based on research that about 40% of all college students will transfer at least once during their academic career. And actually that number is a bit higher in the Tulsa area, and I'll kind of illuminate why that is in just a couple slides. All of you may already know this information, so I don't want to patronize you by sharing something that you already know, but rather to create a common starting place for the conversation. So now we're going to look at Tulsa-specific transfer students. So this makes our higher ed ecosystem unique. So the Tulsa area is incredibly gifted with Tulsa Community College, which is the largest community college in the state with just over 20,000 students. TCC provides all of the lower divisions of the first 2 years or associate's degree coursework in the Tulsa area. So students who want to pursue a degree from a public institution in Tulsa start their journey at TCC and then transfer to a receiving institution. The ones on the bottom of the screen are the members of the consortium. There are just over 2,000 currently enrolled high school students at TCC. So that concurrent students are those students who are taking both high school and TCC classes at the same time. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to poll the audience and ask you to use your like raise hand emoji. Is anybody in the room today a transfer student? Matthew is a transfer student. I am a transfer student. Krista, Joseph, Vanetta. Okay, we've got lots of transfer students. So this question is going to be easy for you. In your mind, identify a Tulsa area transfer student. Maybe it's one currently that you know of. Maybe it's a student that you teach. Maybe you encounter them every single day and you can picture many of them. Or maybe you're just picturing yourself. Think about what unique resources that transfer students possess that they bring with them when they transfer from an institution to another institution. So we'll first talk about that. What are those unique resources that transfer students bring with them?
Do you want us to use words or the chat room?
Either is fine.
I would have to say that they bring with them knowledge of the processes and policies that were in place at their other institution. So to me, they're coming with a certain expectation. If I listen, then I can learn from them. Maybe there's something that was done that their other school was doing that maybe I could be doing better, changing the services we provide.
Oh, that's an excellent point.
I would say adaptability, especially for students who might be in that swirling category. Not all of the schools that they've been to are probably going to be the same, so they've had to adapt each time.
Excellent point. Navigating new systems and learning a new system takes time. It's overwhelming, it's emotionally taxing, and the ability to do that multiple times, that kind of goes back to what both you and Krista said, can like forces a person to be adaptable. Angel, do you have your hand raised to answer?
No, sorry, I had it raised as a transfer student. I forgot to lower it.
That's okay. What other resources do students bring with them?
Okay, I know I already answered, but I also would say like a network, because each place that you're going, you're meeting new people, you're building your network. So you have people that you can like call on to be like, hey, I'm experiencing this. Like, I don't really know what to do. Can you help me? Even though I'm at a new place.
That's a great point. Having that network. And do you mean like network of like former advisors at the former institution, or do you mean like peers?
I would say either. I think my background in working in careers, your network is like always who you know and how they can help you. So either way.
And Kaylee, I'm so sorry, we didn't catch your introduction. What institution are you with?
I work for Tulsa Community College in the TRIO Student Support Services program.
So great to meet you. Okay, so some things that we've mentioned, and Dr. Bates put in the chat box experiences. So knowledge of processes and policies, adaptability, networking, and the network that they bring. Now, what barriers or challenges might they face? We may have already kind of mentioned them because they're kind of twofold, but what barriers exist?
I'm thinking that they have a unique set of challenges, a big set of problems with having transferring in credits that maybe are not recognized by the institution, or substitutions are required, and how do we go through the substitution process for different requirements? Just try and get the cogs together as here's this program, here's what I've taken, how to bring that in smoothly.
That's a really great point. So having to kind of put the puzzle pieces together themselves as they transfer from one institution to another, whether that's degree plan sheets or transfer pathways or things like that.
I think the one thing that when I work with undergraduate students is how do I work my life into school? Because, I work full time, I work multiple jobs, I've got a family, I need to, cook dinner. How do I incorporate going to school full time, like, going to school as well as living my life and, being a parent, et cetera. That's the number one. I feel that at least 10 to 12 times a day when it comes to working with undergraduate students is, how do I make this work?
Matthew, you've hit on a really important point about transfer students and the demographic makeup. Like often transfer students, and we know in Tulsa that about half of transfer students are in what's called like a traditional age range, 18 to 24, and then half are post-traditional or non-traditional students who are 25 and older. And so thinking about on top of navigating this transition from one institution to another, also having all of the life things, maybe having a job, a family, and other responsibilities that make that transfer process even more complex. Yeah. Any other thoughts about barriers or challenges that students face?
So we see this because we have two groups of transfer students on our campus. I mean, we see the 18 to 22-year-old, they're in our health programs. And then we see the older students that are in our more non-traditional programs that meet at night. A huge barrier for them is actually just developing a community outside of their own program, getting service support. When you're an evening student and all of our services are open during the day. So, I mean, it's a huge barrier trying to navigate and become a student at an institution that you only visit in the dark.
Mm-hmm. That is such a great point. And actually, if you look at the research, like sense of belonging is a really important motivator to completion of a post-secondary degree or pathway. Oh, and so I get chills thinking about like through that transfer process, if a student can't attach or connect to a community or a support system, that adds to the complexity and the difficulty of persisting through to completion. Any other thoughts? Welcome, Cheryl and Robert. We are just talking about resources that transfer students bring and barriers or challenges that they may face.
I wanted to add, in some ways, they almost have to learn a different language because we talked about they come with experiences. They kind of have a knowledge of a process, but when they go to a new institution, the office names might be different. The forms they need to fill out are called something else. There's a bunch of acronyms they may not understand. So the knowledge of those things that we don't really teach people, we just expect them to know, that's a difficult barrier.
That's a critical point. And that's really a structural challenge that like could be tweaked. Like that's not necessarily an adaptive challenge. Like a college or university can more easily change the name on a form than like, ensure that everybody's building a sense of community. They can create opportunities for building community. That's more of an adaptive thing, but yeah, that's such a critical point, Sarah.
I would say up until recently with creating things like the, Tulsa Consortium about Tulsa or transfer, I think a lot of things that we do in higher ed are geared toward that traditional student. I mean, you hear a lot of like research and focus on first-time freshmen, especially if those first-time freshmen are first-gen students. And so I don't think as much time has been spent on the transfer population until recent. And I would say even things like joining like something like Greek life is geared more towards your first time traditional coming in students. So getting involved in things on campus at a four-year institution may feel limiting to someone who is a transfer student because they didn't come in their first year freshman experience, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and building that social capital takes time. It's sort of like, you know, joining a movie midway through. Like you kind of have to use your context clues to figure out what just happened the first half of the movie. So thinking about as students transition, making it easy for them to access, but then also thinking about opportunities for students who may not be interested, that opportunities may not cater to, and creating opportunities that cater to post-traditional or non-traditional students. Thanks so much for that, Kaylee. I want to share a few pieces of research from a couple of different groups. So the content in the next few slides come from these three resources. The Transfer Experience book by the John Gardner Institute is an incredible book. It's a compendium of a host of different articles about the transfer experience, from things like, you know, institutional policies and protocols and equity and things like that. And then the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students just put out this resource, the 5 key faculty practices on supporting transfer student success. It is such a rich resource. I'm going to actually put the sites in the chat box for you, hopefully make that easy. And then the Tulsa Higher Education Task Force put together a report in 2020 that incorporates some data from the Tulsa area, so you can see what's happening regarding transfer and then post-secondary outcomes specific to our region. I'm not seeing the chat box, so I will share the link as soon as I stop sharing. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. Those resources are in the chat box for you. So first, we're gonna focus on the NIST's resource. And they really present in a very concise way 5 really key practices. So the first one is confront false assumptions and deficit thinking about transfer. And they share the converse of that, embrace, that the fact that students bring with them an abundance of resources rather than a deficit of knowledge. The second is know who your transfer students are, and we'll dig deeper into each of these. Offer relentless welcome and really interrogate the ways that students, when they come on campus as a transfer student, try and envision what do they encounter? What is the messaging that they receive? Is it welcoming, or is it like, jump in and figure it out? The fourth is to build connections across the institution around transfer, and then even across institutions. And then the fifth is work to improve systems and structures so that they are more transfer friendly. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper. And so the first one, confronting false assumptions and deficit thinking. Every institution, every college, every university has the belief that they're the best. And they should have that belief if you work at an institution, which sometimes can lead to a false dichotomy, thinking that if you're the best, then somebody who transfers from another institution is not the best, or it hasn't received the best education. That is a deficit mindset. And really sitting with that and doing some self-reflection about beliefs and mindsets about transfer students across the institution is really, really critical. And then shifting that mindset to embrace the abundance mindset and asking the question, what are students bringing to the institution that make it a better, more beautiful, more supportive place for all students. Facilitate meaningful connections between transfer students learning and their communities. Earlier, when we were talking about the resources and the barriers that students have and face as they transfer, we talked about how, students kind of have to jump in and figure things out during their first year. So if they transfer as a sophomore, they don't have very much time to figure out all the policies and protocols, much less engage in a research opportunity or an internship or a, service learning project. So creating opportunities for transfer students to quickly connect in with these opportunities that are really rich and will enhance their learning experience is truly critical. And then adopting an equity mindset. Transfer students' agency alone cannot overcome the inequities that persist in transfer supports and information. An equity-minded approach allows institutions to critically reassess and undo practices and mindsets that don't serve all students well. When polling transfer students, often, according to the NIST's study, often students reported that they felt that they had to do a lot of pursuit of information rather than the information being made readily accessible. That pursuit takes time, it takes energy, and it takes away from studies. And so it's also not equitable because maybe first year students at that institution had an orientation where they were given introductions to all of the different policies and protocols and departments and campus tours and things like that. Making sure that those things are available to students at any entry point is adopting a more equitable approach to supports. I've been talking for quite a while. Does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to insert here or questions? I want to lean on the expertise in the room of the folks that work with TRIO. And in the report, researchers really urge readers to hold space for first generation students, low income students, students of color, so that they feel okay about asking for support. And the TRIO services at TCC have done that in such a beautiful way. And I want to create some space for the TRIO folks to share about what you do in case others don't know about TRIO programming.
Thank you, Laura. The TRIO Student Support Services here at TCC helps first generation students, low income students, and students with disabilities to make it to the finish line, get to that degree and transfer. So those are part of our grant objectives. And I think that our college's values and mission statements help to propel students forward based on the research that you were talking about. For example, you belong here is one of our core values. And so TRIO makes an effort to make first generation students feel like they belong here by carving out a space for them. So we have a TRIO Learning Center where students can come and have a dedicated time to work on their homework. We have tutors available, academic support specialists, counselors like Kaylee, who's here on the call, and Sherry, who's here on the call today. And we provide students the opportunity to network with each other. We have a TRIO Connect session each week where the students can get together so that they feel like they belong here. And when they go to the Learning Center, we don't ask them if they need tutoring help. We assume if they're in the tutoring center, that's what they're there for. It's something about asking that question and making a student humble themselves to ask for help is unnecessary and doesn't make them feel like they belong there. So we just assume Hey, how are you doing? Tell us what's going on in your classes. What are you working on this week? And just make it natural and seamless. And so one of our other core values here at the college is everyone can learn. And that's part of that understanding that we have when they walk into the Learning Center. So those are maybe two specific examples I could share with you of how we try to create that environment for students where they do feel very welcome, and that this becomes like a home base, one-stop shop for them. They used to have to go to a separate person that was their advisor. Now they come to TRIO. They can have their counseling, advising, enrollment, transfer, career services. We go visit university campuses. It's a one-stop shop for them. So I think that creates a very good environment for those students that are especially non-traditional students who haven't been to college before.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That was such a great highlight of the work that you're doing with TRIO. Kaylee or Sherry, would you like to share anything?
I guess Joseph summed it up pretty well. He does a good job leading us, and I would say sometimes it's like it's the small things, you know, like we have snacks available in our Learning Center. We have coffee ready every day. And so for students who might be showing up and not had anything to eat, it's not something they have to ask for. It's just there for them. And I think that keeps people coming back because they're not having to ask for that help, kind of like what Joseph's saying. It's just available. And I am lucky to do the work that I do. So I'll just say that much.
Yeah, I just echo the both of them. Kaylee has an amazing way. She actually offices upstairs in the Learning Center. Students always have access to us, and our caseload is smaller than typical advisors, of course, here on campus. So we have that ability to spend more time with a student. So what they both said was just perfect. And I would just say I too am grateful to be able to work in TRIO.
Thank you three so much. I really, really appreciate that. And because it gives a such a poignant and meaningful illustration to what some of these concepts were in the first point from the research about an equity-minded approach and really tailoring your approaches to meet the needs of your specific students. So the second is really in the vein of that social emotional component that we mentioned earlier. Know who your transfer students are. Learn the stories of transfer students. Learn about their aspirations. What if they're at the starting institution, what are their aspirations? Where do they want to transfer to? If they're at a receiving institution, where did they transfer from? And what are their hopes for their degree attainment? Become really familiar with institutional data around transfer and learn, you know, who's transferring successfully and who's exiting the program prematurely that may need some more supports that can be put in place to help them succeed and to help them achieve. And then educate yourself about the main barriers that students are facing. And the best source for finding this information is to go straight to the students and ask, what are the barriers that you are encountering? Of course, we can look at research, that's really helpful, but to really understand your context, the best source are going to be your transfer students. I do want to, in reference to the second point, become familiar with institutional data about transfer. In case you haven't seen some of this data, I do want to share with you some Tulsa region student data. So there's around 40,000 students in the Tulsa region going to school in the Tulsa region. And just above 9,000 degrees were awarded in 2019. The student population skews toward women with 56%. And there's that statistic I mentioned earlier that 51% of students in the Tulsa area are 18 to 24 and 49% are older than 25. So those age groups often have very different needs, motivations, resources, barriers that they're encountering. So being able to diversify and meet the needs for those two groups is something that institutions really have to problem solve around and think about deeply. And then we can also see that the distribution on the bottom of the page, 42% of students attending colleges and universities are considered students of color, including Black and African American, Hispanic and Latine, 2 or more races, Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. According to Impact Tulsa's 2019 Community Impact Report, citing the US Census, the diversity of the city is growing, and within the next 10 years, this collective number will rise above 50%. So the need for culturally responsive instruction and an equity lens is so important. So a lot of text on this slide, so I will share the slide deck with you, but these are some really important statistics about transfer specifically. In Oklahoma, only about 15.5% of the students who started higher education at a community college back in 2010, so this is cohort data, completed a bachelor's degree in 6 years. That was actually a statistic that prompted the work of the formation of the consortium, and creating these seamless transfer pathways really was the impetus for that work. In 2017, 2018, 3,419 students transferred from TCC. Of these transfer students, 66.5% of them went to one of the consortium institutions. And then we know that, as you can see in the image on the right, that disparities persist based on race and ethnicity, as the rate of bachelor's degrees attainment among white residents in Tulsa County, which is 36%, is nearly twice as high as the rate among African American residents, 19%, and over 3 times higher than the rate among Hispanic and Latine residents. So there's a clear disparity there. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of disaggregating your data to understand the full and the nuanced profile of transfer students. And hopefully you can see why, through this illustration, why it's so important when we look at Tulsa's data. We also know the top majors for TCC students who transfer and finish a degree at a receiving institution. So you can see that distribution here on the screen, how many degrees were achieved back in 2018, 2019. Just under 2,000 degrees were awarded then. So kind of giving you a little sampling of like understanding the transfer specific data, but at your institution, you can get more granular with that data. So something that the TRIO team did an excellent job of also illustrating is offering relentless welcome, creating opportunities and going above and beyond to communicate either explicitly or implicitly that transfer students are welcome on campus, whether that's a messaging campaign that's more explicit, or the creation, having something on all syllabi. I don't know. It could be anything that really communicates transfer students belong here. And number 2, the last point was to identify barriers to entry. This third point, eliminate barriers to entry. And that takes, making big changes to eliminate different things can be complicated in a big system. And we know that, college and universities are often big systems, but if we want to see the success of students, then being able to make those changes to eliminate barriers to entry is really critical, and not to cling to the notion of like, this is the way that we've always done things, so we're going to do them this way forever. That's really how you limit your innovation. So being able to think outside the box about how to do things differently and get rid of those barriers. As you're communicating, and I say you, and this report was actually developed for faculty and staff, but I mean, you can personalize this to whatever context that you're working in. Ensure that you're affirming students' capacities to learn and succeed, and highlighting the fact that how far they've made it in their journey in post-secondary and how far they're going to continue to make it because they have all of the things that they need to succeed. And then normalize help-seeking behaviors and put in place supports for accessing help. So Joseph earlier mentioned the tutoring centers, where rather than, somebody showing up and someone sort of asking, what do you need tutoring, like assuming that that's the reason they're at the tutoring center, and offering help freely so that it destigmatizes asking for help or pursuing assistance or support. Creating inviting spaces, like Kaylee said, the offering snacks, like just creating those warm environments where people want to be and want to exist and hang out is really important, and something that the researchers really strongly urged in this brief. The fourth is building connections across the institution. If one person's really passionate about transfer supportive culture at an institution, cool, like they will be really influential in their sphere of influence. But if you want to have a bigger impact, making an institution-wide effort to be transfer focused is important. I do want to shamelessly plug all of the consortium institutions and say that back in 2017, 2018, all 7 of those institutions went through a transfer-focused institution-wide self-study that it was a very intense process to really examine what were the policies, protocols that institutions went through or that they had in place for transfer students, and then how could they improve those policies and practices to be more transfer affirmative. And that's actually a criteria of joining the consortium, is to have a transfer focused self-study. So it's really, really important to do that self-reflection. Make sure that there are clear connection points for students to build relationships with student affairs and then other departments. I've worked for a couple of different institutions, and as a faculty member, I experienced like having the assumption made that I knew who to contact. And if I, as a faculty member, experienced that there was that assumption, students probably are feeling that too, sort of the assumption of like, oh, I didn't know what the bursar was for like a solid 2 years when I started my journey in higher ed. So really like explaining who they see for financial questions and who they see for scheduling questions. And maybe that's the role of the advisor. Maybe that's the role of a orientation professor, somebody that's in charge of teaching the orientation course. Just have a touch point for transfer students. And then again, this kind of goes back to the first point, involve transfer students in high impact practices like research and service learning, internships and study abroad, things that, most college students start learning about in the first couple of years of their journeys in higher ed. Make sure that there are those on-ramps to those opportunities for transfer students as well. I do want to, again, shout out the consortium institutions and all of the work that they've done since 2017, 2018 in building seamless pathways from TCC to the receiving institution. And this is a beautiful collage of collaboration that really captures how comprehensive those like degree pathways and commitment to supporting transfer is. And in a second, I'm going to show you something even cool. Well, it's equally as cool. The fifth is to work to improve the systems and structures. Ultimately, when there's inequity, it's often systemic or structural. And so there have to be some changes to the systems and structures to remedy those situations where inequity exists. But explore transfer data at the program level. I know that gets a little more granular rather than looking at institution-wide, how are our transfer students doing? Looking at each department or program and seeing how are our transfer students doing in our program and what are the barriers that they're facing. So taking that analysis down a level. And sometimes that leads into some hard conversations, but those hard conversations will lead to student success in degree completion. Learn with colleagues, recognizing that, especially in Tulsa, our ecosystem is such that there are a lot of transfer students in the city, many, many of them. And we're all learning, we're all on this journey together as we find out what the best practices are for our specific students. And I actually say our because I do teach transfer students. I teach education courses at OU. And I have transfer students in my class, and I'm constantly thinking about how can I support them. And then the third is identify where a clear transfer pathway into the institution or department exists. So if you work for a department and your department has no transfer options for students, really, think about what would it take to create a transfer pathway. And I keep talking about these transfer pathways. I really want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to take you to a really cool tool on TCC's website. This is the transfer portal, where students can see very clearly what their degree trajectory could look like from start to finish if they started at TCC and then finished their degree at a receiving institution. So maybe I've seen this before, so just indulge me for a second. But I'm going to type in, let's say a student wants to get a bachelor in education, maybe early childhood. They can type in the degree, go into, oops, I hit the wrong button. Let me try that one more time. Education, child development, and then you can see what receiving institutions offer degrees related to that field. So let's just take a peek at NSU's early childhood education, Bachelor's of Science. It looks very much like a degree plan sheet, traditional degree plan sheet, but it's articulated across TCC to the receiving institution. So year 1, TCC, year 2, TCC, year 3, NSU, year 4, it's course by course. So students can see very clearly laid out for them, these are the courses that you need to sign up for and that the institutions have agreed will transfer, so that, like Dr. Schoberg said earlier, you don't lose credits in that process. There's that really seamless pathway. So kind of taking away some of the complexity that students might face. Any questions about that tool? I've gotten a lot of great feedback that many folks use it for a variety of purposes. High school counselors have told me they use it. Many, many people have used that. I also mentioned the Transfer Experience book by the John Gardner Institute, and this they offer a list of recommendations as well. They're very similar to the 5 that were mentioned in the NISTS resource, but I do want to highlight them. So champion a transfer affirming culture in your institution, engage faculty in transfer support. So it really does have to be system and institution wide. Communicate about transfer with students and faculty and community, and really think, what does that messaging need to be? And what are the implicit messages and the explicit messages? Build articulation agreements and transfer pathways. Collaborate and innovate across institutions, like what we're doing in this exact space, collaborating and sharing some ideas across institutions. Collect transfer focused data and be sure to disaggregate it, and examine the orientation program and the orientation mechanism to help students get acclimated to an institution.